Tim, let me ask you about the, we've been kind of talking about the tight end position in the offseason, and Sorensen's one of those guys that I'm interested in and watching this upcoming year. They're in the hunt for a top tight end, and a couple of top tight ends across the country. You'd think that's quietly could be a position, even though the state produces them at a nice clip. That tight end position is one in which Nebraska can accentuate on a national level.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's an opportunity there, and I think because like I mean what they have a chance to do this year with Heinrich and some of the guys in the room, and the excitement that can build for the future. You're bringing in a very sound prospect in Sorensen. You have an opportunity in 27 to potentially get in with the Mata Hudson. Like I think there's an opportunity here over the next year, and I think there's some questions like, hey, I think Marcus Satterfield deserves a ton of credit for kind of the development at that position. I think if you talk to the tight ends, they love him. They think highly of him as a position coach. Ahmad Hudson, the key reason Nebraska is in that recruitment and a top contender of that recruitment is Marcus Satterfield and the effort Marcus Satterfield put in that first visit when Hudson was in town. So what happens at the end of this year? Like, is Satterfield still around? Ideally, yes, in some capacity, but we'll see. I think that's something that remains a question. I don't think it's going to affect necessarily the people in the room or Nebraska's commits or anything, but
got Terwilliger. There's some guys out there.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. I think looking ahead to 27, I think there's an opportunity for Nebraska if all of these things hit, because like it's all about I don't know how like the best way, but like branding, like I mean, and in the moment too. If Nebraska like a couple of months from now can say, hey, we put Thomas Fedoni in the draft, and then the next year we had Heinrich Haarberg do this, and now he's set to go for the draft. And we've got a rising tight end in Carter Nelson, who national scouts are buzzing about as a potential future top tight end prospect in the draft. And then you've got Luke Sorensen coming in after he's supposed to be a focal point of Servite's offense. They play in the Trinity League. If he has the year I think he's going to have, he's going to be, kind of climbing up the rankings pretty quick himself. So like that, like when I say braiding, I'm saying like a couple months from now, there's going to be a lot of talk about the tight ends at Nebraska, or there could be a lot of talk about the tight ends at Nebraska. And that's how you get to that point where, okay, yeah, right now, kind of jokingly, it's that tight end they kind of joke about tight end you can start to make the case if some of these start to hit for you.
Tim, you mentioned all those guys there, and DB and I had this conversation yesterday. I think from what I've seen, I get the athletic profile isn't quite the same as some of those guys. I still think Luke Lindenmeyer is the best tight end on the roster.
I agree. I think he's the most well-rounded. I think he's a guy that. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
So I was kind of looking, because, and tell me if you agree here, because I know you like to get into the nitty-gritty on this stuff sometimes. I asked DB if he was the only tight end on the roster where you get no clue as about what's to happen because he's on the field.
You're talking about when he breaks the huddle?
Yeah. Like if you break the huddle with Lindenmeyer as your personnel, as opposed to Haarberg or Carter Nelson, is he the only one that you get no clue just by the fact that he's in the game about
I think so. Yeah, if Markway was healthy too, I think him too. But yeah, I think he for sure in those situations. Also, I do wonder a little bit with that group. Like, yeah, like there's going to be a question of what Nebraska does when Lindenmeyer comes out. But from a pure like where is he going to be and what's he going to do? I kind of wonder if that's going to be Heinrich in specific games. Like, hey, he could be in the backfield. He could be that second tight end spot. He could be in line. He could be out in the slot. He could be catching a pass and then throwing a pass. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I think you're right in the sense that I think Lindenmeyer is going to be the guy that he comes out and is like, oh, Nebraska could be running or passing. We have no idea. But if Nebraska comes out in like, 12 personnel, when the two tight ends are Heinrich and Carter, it's like they're probably throwing it. Like, I think that just, yeah.
So let me ask you something. If I'm just thinking personnel in my head, right? It's got to be a team that spends a fair amount of time in 11 personnel, right?
I think so. That's what I said after the Markway injuries. Like, I think Nebraska's going to be being a lot more 11 this year. But I don't know, man. Like, I do wonder as we get closer to it. Like, I feel like we've seen in practice specifically, we've seen a lot of like kind of jumbo, like 12, even 13 type stuff in practice.
12 was what I thought all offseason.
Yeah, prior.
Yeah.
Remember, I was like,
yeah.
hey, Nebraska's going to want to run the ball. I don't. I get the flash and dash of the wide receivers. I think they want to run the ball.
Mhm.
And 12 personnel allows them to still be versatile. And it's a nightmare for a guy like me because you're still balanced,
Mhm.
right? One back, two tight ends, and they don't have to be traditional is a headache. So and I think that's definitely still on the table. I guess whether it's 11 or 12, let's just say I think, one back with some tight end or H-back type look seems to be the way that these guys will want to play.
Yeah, I agree.
So what do you think that means the offense looks like if they are playing mostly out of 11 personnel? And do you still think there's going to be some of the versatility like you were talking about with Haarberg in terms of where they line up? Because in my head, for whatever reason, when we were talking about Haarberg lining up in different spots, I always kind of imagined him as the second tight end in that scenario.
Yeah, I that's where I kind of see him, but I think there's going to be like, would it surprise you guys if Nebraska's in 11 and it's like a second and long, or even like a third and medium, third and long, and it's three receivers, Emmett in the backfield, and then it's Heinrich out there instead of Luke as like maybe the detached, like in the slot. Would that surprise y'all? I don't think so. I think like that's where we see, if it's one tight end and it's Heinrich on the field, that's where I could see it. I mean, I think there's just also a world where Nebraska throws out a lot of different wrinkles because they are so versatile. Like again, Heinrich can do a lot of different things. I do think they want to utilize him in a couple of different ways. And that's only the reason why I think it's that question. I think it's going to be like a handful of snaps where he does something different than what a traditional tight end would do. But I do think there's that, like, the idea of that. I also think, and I wanted to ask you guys this, because I mentioned when Markway went down, like I was like, oh, I think Nebraska's going to play a lot more 11. As we get deeper into fall camp, I'm like, well, are they going to play more 11 because Markway went down, or because they're so comfortable with the depth at receiver?
I think so. It's interesting. Like the coach in me says, stylistically, I want to utilize my best players.
Mhm.
Right. So
tight end's one of those
I,
spots.
I don't know. Is my fourth wide receiver better than my second tight end versus how I want to play offense? I mean, that's the difference between 10 and 11, or
Yeah.
11 and 12, right? In this case, I do think your third option at wide receiver is better than your second tight end in the game until you get the same pass catching kind of prowess out of the position, whomever
Yeah.
it is, right?
I mean, I think there's a point.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
understand what I'm saying philosophically, right? So I think
Yes.
that's what it ultimately boils down to. And it's not just singularly better. Like, you can't say, hey, is having Barney on the field better or worse than a second tight end? It's not that easy.
Yeah.
It's relative to what we want to be on the offense. How much are we willing to only play with an X and a Z versus having two tight ends?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
One of those guys has to come off the field.
Stylistically, is Barney more useful to you than Heinrich Haarberg?
Because ideally, it's like, fudge, Barney's one of our best players. Why wouldn't we play with him as much as we can?
As much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
That's what it
Barney's on
was.
the field. Yeah, I think Barney and Key are like staples. I think they're on the field in most everything. Where for me, where it gets interesting is like, is there a point this
Could you see
fall?
Barney being an X or a Z?
No, I mean,
Well,
no, not.
that's the dilemma, right?
Yeah, like especially not with the personnel, like the other options Nebraska would have to be an X or a Z. Like I just think it makes more sense.
That's what you have to consider if you use another tight end or an H-back type outside of Lindenmeyer.
Right.
Somebody's coming off the field.
And you probably don't want it to be Ja'Cory Barney.
Or you have to how much can you use, like,
yeah. How many different ways can you use them
before you reach a point of diminishing returns? Because you still want to be able to run the ball too.
Yeah.
That's
Is there a point? Yeah, I was wondering with this question specifically, because it does bring up something like, again, in terms of, hey, is the second tight end better than Nebraska's third? I don't think so. I mean, I think they need to prove it.
It's not really that linear, but
yes,
philosophically,
exactly.
I'm saying if we run duo or power, are there other ways we can get to it and utilize our personnel and not compromise our passing game? Or how
Right.
being an 11 personnel allow us to still do that? And is this going to be our RPO guy? Like, those are the cool things that where you're putting an offense together where you have to understand your personnel.
Right.
Like, I,
Yeah.
I, I think players, not plays. So
can you run the way you want to with Barney on the field instead of an extra tight end?
yeah, I just use
Or
that as an example.
yeah.
But yeah, right. I mean, it's November, man. What are we doing? It's October. How does that fit with what our philosophy is offensively?
Yeah.
I think I
As we're
think I
having this
think part of that
conversation.
I
Yeah.
think
Go
part
ahead.
of that though is why Dana was so animate about perimeter blocking
Mhm.
early. Because yeah, I want to be able to RP. I want to be able to utilize some of the fundamentals of my offense, but we can't do anything on the perimeter without being physical.
Mhm.
I don't care what it is.
Yeah.
Right? If you're not physical in the run game as perimeter blockers, in this league, it would be hard to still be a prolific passing offense because people wouldn't play you honest.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
defensive coaches will adjust, right? So you
Right.
want well-rounded. You want to be well-rounded.
Yeah. I was
But
just about,
otherwise, you become a
as we were
victim
having
of
this
scheme.
conversation.
What's
Yeah.
that?
No, I was just about to mention, as we were having this conversation, Nebraska is better. Like, the receivers are better blockers. They are like they that's something that was been a point of emphasis. Barney, is an effort blocker. Isaiah's a good blocker. Dane's a solid blocker. Like, yeah, like, and you mentioned early in the offseason or times of the offseason you thought it was going to be more 12. I did too. Like, and for just the reason of the tight ends and all of that, I do think the reason our minds are changing a little bit is because, yeah, I mean, I think the receiver talent is better. I think they are further along as blockers than maybe even Dana maybe have even accounted for coming out of last season. I mean, I do wonder if we asked him honestly what Dana's head. I mean, he said it straight up, like, it was not a great situation in January. Like, where his head was at with the roster he had in January versus the roster he has now, and what he's able to do with the pieces he has now compared to maybe what the cupboard looked like in January. The other question with the tight end room, I just wanted to throw out real quick, if he starts to pick up the offense and starts to, like, kind of move around quickly as a result of his mastery of the offense, is there a point where Nebraska can this season where Nebraska can say, okay, maybe it makes more sense to go in 12 here because Carter Nelson as a second tight end is like a matchup nightmare. Is there a point this year where we could see that? Is there a specific matchup we could see that potentially where Nebraska feels that Carter Nelson, if he's in the playbook as much as he's supposed to be, and he's got that
Or
part down.
Haarberg or any of these guys
Yeah,
that
any of those guys, any
appear
of those
like
guys.
they be good that appear to be able to run after the catch.
So the question I was going to ask, and I'm glad you brought up Carter here, is I sort of view, and maybe I'm nuts just because I like Bonner too much, but like I view him and Bonner and their skill sets sort of similarly. Like, they sort of both feel like tweeners almost.
I don't think we respect as a fan, like in the media and as a fan base. I don't feel like we respect Bonner's talents enough. I think we describe him. We think Bonner, and we think, oh man, hard hat, lunch pail kind of guy.
No, I think he's really talented.
He's a pretty talented player. Like, he can do a lot of
Every
different
time he got the
things.
ball in his hands, he tended to do something positive with
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm kind of asking the question, though, is like we're talking about this with tight ends with, hey, can you still pass the way you want to with two tight ends in the game, and could you still run the way you want to with three wide receivers in the game? But if you're using, say, Bonner in one of those situations where he sort of can do both and he's really talented with the ball in his hands, like I almost wonder if like we talk about Carter Nelson as sort of the glitch in the offense in a positive way that he can cause matchup issues. I wonder if we shouldn't also be talking about Bonner in that way from the wide receiver room.
Yeah, I think so. In a different way, but yeah, like, just because he's another guy that you don't really know what Nebraska's doing when he's out there. Like, Nebraska trots out an 11. It's Emmett Johnson in the backfield, Dylan Raiola, Luke Lindenmeyer is the tight end, Jenner and Bonner's one of the receivers, and then it's Dane Key and Ja'Cory Barney. What's Nebraska doing? You have no idea. like they could block and they could just run it, and you feel pretty good about that group being able to block. They could throw it, and you feel pretty good about the opportunities, for a Dane Key to maybe clear out the field. Maybe you get Bonner on an underneath route, and you have, maybe Jacory on a deep cross. Like, you have all these opportunities to, it's like you trot that specific personnel out there. The defense is going to have to account for essentially everything.
Mm. Oh.
Good conversation there with our guy, Tim Verghese, Inside Nebraska. Tim, appreciate the time. As always, we'll talk to you next week.
Appreciate you guys.